of how to conceptualize a project and sort of even the approach to a career in journalism from some really courageous reporters and editors with a lot of experience. We're going to talk about some of those issues more here, but we're going to dig deeper into how to approach reporting on complex science or technical or public health issues, and then how to think about conveying them to the public in compelling and accurate ways. So I'm just going to say a couple of words about each of the journalists we have here, and then let them go, and then we'll do some Q&A after, like we did in the first panel. So Allison Shelley is an independent documentary photographer and multimedia creator. She is co-director of the 250-member nonprofit Women Photojournalists of Washington, and adjunct faculty in the New Media and Photojournalism graduate program at the Corcoran College of Art and Design. And some of her projects through support from the Pulitzer Center have focused on women's and maternal health issues in Nepal and Nigeria. Julia Rendleman graduated with a degree in political science from Loyola, New Orleans in 2002, and received a master's degree in photojournalism from Southern Illinois University in 2010. Like you all, in 2011, she was a student fellow at the Pulitzer Center with a project on the paradox of Jamaican agriculture, an abundant supply of fish, fruits, and vegetables while farmers struggle to find financial success. And Daniella Zalcman is an award-winning photojournalist based in London and New York, and her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and many other publications. She graduated from Columbia University in 2009 with a degree in architecture, and her most recent work for the Pulitzer Center has been documenting the struggle for LGBT rights in Uganda. So I'll first turn it over to Allison.
Hey guys, I'm going to start by just playing a little clip from a video I've been working on. It has not yet come out, but it should be coming out on NPR. So I'm going to just play that little clip.
We went everywhere together, and some people thought they were sisters. She was tall, taller than her. She was beautiful. I think if she had not done that abortion, she would still be alive.
Nigeria has one of the highest abortion-related death rates in the world. But while illegal and underground, abortions are common, especially among teenagers.
Many of these young girls who die have no idea the dangers that they're putting their lives in.
As an obstetrician at one of the biggest public hospitals in Lagos, Dr. Ogadembe has treated complications from countless unsafe abortions.
At least 3-4 times a week, I would see the result of unsafe abortion. The young girls coming in, moribund, septic, perforated uterus, damaged bowel, things I'd never seen before in my life.
In 2012, Mary's friend Aya met a man on the internet and agreed to meet him at this hotel. Mary came along, but then things took a turn.
This was where she was raped. This one. I was outside and we were inside. But then the noise was coming up from the room. After finding the door, he came out. And he just looked at me and just looked away. When I went inside to see my friend, she was crying. He said he beat her. So I didn't know what to do, so I just took her and went home.
So I put that because that's just a little sample of what I do, and that was the last project I did for Pulitzer Center in Nigeria, and talking about abortion, not legal there, so And so today I wanted to talk just a little bit about for basically like preparing yourself and for an interview when it's a really sensitive topic like that, right? This could be like an Ebola victim, the family of an Ebola victim. This could be like rape survivor, this could be flood victim, right? So many things that I think a lot of you guys are going to be dealing with intense topics and even around science and health. So I just wanted to talk a little bit, give some tips about how I approach some of these things. So I have a couple tips, and I would just start with the big one, which is knowing your topic inside and out. And that means, you know, not just having to solve, but when you get to that point, you need to know it. I think all of you are going to know that. Since you're reading reports, you're talking to engineers, you're connecting with other journalists, you're also maybe academics. Right? Some of the reports, I find that to be and I like to cite these folks. So that's a basic when you're in a foreign place, and but I think one of the most important things that I can say about that is finding it's just kind of like translator, but also I always say like fixer is like a cultural translator too, right? It's somebody that knows the situation that you're going into. That doesn't necessarily mean yes, I'm from Nigeria, but no, I'm from or you know, I work with women, you know, in a clinic setting and knowing, you know, I know the terms that they use in clinic, I know the language around the topic that we're talking about. I know that to go into this part of the city, you have to first visit the elder and give them something. So I think that's the other sort of basic, you know, as you're preparing for your reporting and telling two kind of basic things that I just and then when you get to the interview itself, you're sitting down, you're not sitting there, you're preparing yourself. Trauma maybe, loss, or at the least even things that have changed in their lives maybe. How do you talk to them? How do you think about talking to them? But uncomfortable, and also to that to be fair, because you have to do something for this person. So the first thing that I think about is making the environment comfortable. Sometimes that means like going to, you know, meet the person ahead of time without all the fear. Sometimes that means like going to the person in the interview first, and not where it's going to be, so you're not person. Prepare yourself mentally for turning off your camera, turning off your interview if you find that person is uncomfortable or doesn't, you know, just isn't responding to what you're saying. Turn that recorder off. Or, you know, have a personal moment with your subject. They should, you know, before you even start interviewing, they should understand your motivations. Why are you there? Clearly, their participation is voluntary, right? They might be in a place where, you know, women do what they're told. So if you sit down and you say, you don't have to answer these questions. That often just puts people in this a little bit more. I bring a release form with me in a travel for assignment. I have it translated into local language. I have copies of this, and I have piece of pictures of people interviewing, Picture the slash translator read what they released to them, talk about it, and ask them, does it sound okay to you? Or is it just like I blank with your name, give my permission to do this. And it's totally voluntary. This is what it's going to be used for, and then I ask them if they want to sign it. And they sign it, and then I give them a copy so that they understand exactly what they're going into. And that helps quite a bit. Ask them if they would like anybody else present in the room. While you're having the interview, maybe it's important that there's husband or sister or kids certainly have somebody, someone else there. So I find that those are just ways you can set the stage effectively and just increase your odds of making things go more smoothly. Another thing that I found to be important is bringing a little bit of not a bribe, not anything valuable that is like a payment for what you're doing, but just like world cooking. That can be it can be maybe a portrait of a picture you took I've done before, and I take pictures. Every time I go out and photograph, I try to always keep in mind, like, try to get a shot of them that's something that I know that they would not find a print of. And almost everywhere in the world, you can find a little storefront, a little kiosk, that will make you a 4x6 print for like 30 cents. It's surprising what they do. And I find that is a huge deal everywhere. Like, here's a picture of you. Like, I got on my vitamin, and people generally just don't know. So I find that also to be really good icebreaker. And your fixer can help you figure out what the next step. I usually have a bag of like old Washington, and I find people like snowballs of the White House in them. I don't know why, but they're really cheap. I have a bunch of those. Just bring those on. Just little things, Ask how people would like to be identified. This is really important, especially for women, especially for people who are looking for, violence or rape survivors. Very important, and I think Daniella is going to be talking more about that. We set values like that. They may not be people with terms like survivor or things like that. Like, how do they? What's the vocabulary they want to use? Listen to how they're responding to you. Be aware that your presence alone is going to be there in the community and walking with them and other people in the community might bring unwanted attention or suspicions for the person. As you interact with that person, something does. So think about that. Yeah, this is something you're talking with your picture about. Where should you interview them? Maybe a place that's not in there. Maybe a place that's, let that person decide where they can visit. There's a couple words that are a little bit triggery that I would also use in my interviews. I try to avoid using the words still. Are you still suffering from this or still doing this? Even today, because it implies that like their grieving has like a time period that it's got to be over at some point, or it should be over, and they may not be ready to have that. They're not doing that. So, I think this all boils down to just listening, basic listening, basic not listening to I try to avoid overlapping. If that sounds like but just thinking of this person that you are with as someone other, someone that is different, somebody that is not different. And I think that is, I think we can all think about this as a pretty big pitfall for a lot of journalists, right? it's tempting to do that. It's tempting to think, wow, this country is so different. These people are living such a different way, and there's such different conditions. Let's emphasize the differences. And I think the most valuable thing, and I think something that Pulitzer Centers really in touch with is trying to bridge that gap, and trying to think about the ways in which people are similar. Think about the ways in which you have connections. So in my interviews with people, I'm constantly asking the question, how is this person just like me? What are the similar things that are there? And how do they find the situation with them? So I try to think about how I can do my reporting with humanizing details, like not like, especially when you're talking about things that people don't understand all, like, when people are talking about conflict, or like, oh, my family was shot, or 10 of my family members died of Ebola last week. But how? Did they die because they were walking to school and constantly? No. So one of those things that communicates very beautiful and familiar to people. Something else I keep in mind all the time is that issues are almost never black and white. Right? Life is gray, and it's really easy to make it black and white. And I think sometimes here are the issues, here's the rules. But the things that are gray are the things that humanize people, right? Those little details, those little imperfections, those things that make people human. And they may seem contradictory and hard to live with. They're really hard. But those are the important, those are the things that we, I think, really strive to think about how to convey. Those are the things that I try to and so I guess the last thing I will say is, okay, now it's just a quote by Susan Sontag in The Argument from the Mothers. And she said, the other is regarded only as someone to be seen, not someone like us who also sees. So if you avoid the other, I think you can like yourself like that as someone who's also seeing and experiencing the world.
Good morning. So I'm going to be talking about using personal narrative and people's stories to bring awareness to maybe a complex public health or global issue. And this might be obvious to a lot of you writers, photographers, but I understand some of you study international relations and maybe it's helpful. So I'm going to do this by talking about two reporting experiences I've had, where I was able to relate potentially difficult science subjects into a meaningful human story. The first is about fracking, which is natural gas extraction, and it is an international subject. Maybe you all will have an opportunity to go to Mexico or China or Poland and cover it, but I covered it in Western Pennsylvania. When I came to Western Pennsylvania in 2012, fracking had been going underway for about 5 years, and I found myself, I worked for a daily newspaper, I found myself going to a lot of protests and rip and grins, and people behind podiums, and I didn't think my images were really adding anything to the story. In fact, it's kind of making it worse. It's the same picture of the same angry protesters holding the sign, and people would call them activists in a very, angry way. I was basically adding to their reputation of being crazy people. So eventually, maybe a little slow. Sorry. Eventually, this story became real to me and had some visual potential when I discovered a community of about 30 miles from Pittsburgh, where I live, that was living without drinking water. And their water wells ran dry about the same time that fracking came to their neighborhood. And the science wasn't conclusive. It wasn't, you couldn't do a fair story that said fracking equals you'll die of thirst. But what we could do is show these people, these very real people, at the heart of a bigger global issue, issues about energy independence, environmental well-being, and public health. Here are the people who mattered to this story. Before, what you were talking about with others, I had been to photograph these craftivists, and they all lived in the city, and there's a moratorium on fracking there. And so often I felt like they were angry for others, and you know, I had to ask them, like, who are the sufferers like that you're fighting for? And one of them took me out to this community. Okay, and so these images, this is the community that you're seeing. It wasn't about finger pointing or, you know, blaming the energy company or protesting. For this community, it was about banding together, finding solutions for their very real problem of not having water to drink. So they started a water bank, kind of like a food bank, but with water. Churches opened their doors and turned on their faucets, and so this made it a universal story about human, you know, compassion and hope and community. And I think a lot of people were able to digest the story, whereas before it was just like, oh, crazy people, because there were real people. Yeah. And eventually they opened up to me enough to where I could, you know, be in the shower. So a more recent opportunity, I had to bring a visual narrative to a public health issue came this summer when I received a grant from the Pulitzer to go to Nepal to trace the lives of Vietnamese refugees from the camps there to their new homes in America. And I guess this is public health in a way that talking about the complete well-being of someone and not just their physical well-being. I'll give you a short background story on these refugees. 100,000 people were expelled from Bhutan about 20 years ago. They eventually settled in Nepal, and the UN helped them establish 7 refugee camps. I think it was 17 failed talks between Bhutan and Nepal to repatriate these people to their home country. It didn't work, and so the idea of third country resettlement was presented. And so now these people are being resettled mostly in the United States. It started slowly, but I think now about 80,000 of these refugees have been relocated to the United States. So great, good story, happy ending, they're all in America. I think a lot of American citizens and some of the refugees there thought, you know, America is great, there's opportunity, everyone goes to high school, everyone has electricity and clean water. So the solution to transport these people away from their homeland and relocate them literally on the other side of the globe, all aces. But the reality of the situation, as I'm sure you all know from your own life experiences and reporting, is that in transitions, families are split apart, children are left behind. For example, I met divorced parents left behind in Nepal. They have little hope of ever reuniting with their children who are now in America. And then there's the situation of the chosen, those whose numbers were called, whose immigration papers were in order, and they feel lucky to escape life in the refugee camp, but they also feel sad. So there's this duality that they get to move on, but they have to leave behind their loved ones. And in America, the Vietnamese refugees have the highest suicide rate in the world. There's a guilt associated with leaving their family behind. Missing loved ones is a real thing that creates undeniable sadness. And not to mention the culture shock and a hard time assimilating. For many in the older generation who lack English language skills, they may never meet an American person They might just stay in their apartment and watch bad daytime television. Okay, so again, with this story, I wanted to use these personal narratives to show the human impact of a large-scale multinational solution to displacement. And the picture you saw, or maybe you haven't seen yet, I'm not sure, of the man holding his daughter. This guy's name is Smile, and his ex-wife was immigrating that day to Kentucky with his son and daughter. But Smile is a Nepali-born and not a refugee, so it may be that this is the last time he sees his daughter. And I don't think that if I had the opportunity from the Pulitzer Center to go to Nepal, that I could have a picture like this that I think really humanizes the story. A lot of people in Pittsburgh, I think, I don't want to say a lot, but some people in Pittsburgh had an idea, that you've made it to America, so that's great. And as Americans, I think we have the idea that it is kind of a global goal, to have the American dream. But the truth is that it's not seen, like you're saying, in gray areas. There's people left behind, and when you get here, you're not going to be automatically happy and automatically good Americans. So I guess I'll leave you with one comment that someone left on Instagram, and I posted this on Instagram. A guy from Pittsburgh, he said, "I got really upset with my daughter this morning for not eating her French toast fast enough." And then he put hashtag heartbroken, hashtag perspective. And I feel like at least I got what I wanted across to this one guy.
I should have mentioned that Julie is now a staff photographer at the Pittsburgh Gazette. Daniella, would you like me to run through your slides as well? Or,
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
Hey guys, how's everyone doing? So I'm going to talk a little generally about approach when you're dealing with technical stories in general, but maybe specifically public health stories. And I think Allison touched on a lot of good points as well. But so I think a ring theme for today is that one of the first things you have to consider, one of the first things you have to deal with when story is access. When you're looking at a community who maybe,
Mike.
When you're dealing with a community who is heavily stigmatized, criminalized, or even much worse, how do you go about earning that trust, and how do you go about keeping that trust, which is maybe the most important part of it that we don't always talk about as much as we should. When it comes to public health stories, when it comes to human rights issues, frequently the greatest access point can be NGOs. These are people who are experts, NGOs, activists, people who are on the ground. They know exactly what the story is. They know exactly who you should talk to. They are a great point of entry. The problem is they can't be your whole story because activists obviously have their own agendas, and while it's a really important side of any story, you need to make sure that you can break away from that at some point. So you use them to get into the community, you use them for background, you use them for information, and then you have to be able to flow yourself away respectfully and say, "That's great, thank you," and take off. And while you have that partnership, while you're working with NGOs, how do you make it clear to them? Because a lot of people genuinely don't understand we have an ethical code of conduct. There are things that we can and cannot do, and we have certain responsibilities. And one of them is, a lot of people think that journalism can be somewhat transactional. They'll say, well, maybe you can mention our organization, maybe you can give us a shout out to this fundraiser we're having, but it's not malicious, and it seems that almost be so clearly dismissive of inquiries like that. It's just people sometimes don't know that you have to make it clear. I'm really sorry, I feel like I really like the work you do, and I'm trying in my way to raise awareness for the kind of work you do, but you just have to come up with respectful and polite ways and understand that. Because it's hard, and sometimes it's their job to push their agendas as much as they can, and it's also our job to be reliable. One thing you also have to worry about is translation, particularly when you look at public health stories or things that very technical, very jargon heavy, very lingo based. When your entry point frequently, as Melissa was talking about this morning, when you're starting reading medical journals or reports that are really dense, it's very easy to get lazy and just parrot that material over and over again. I was in Melbourne in July of Pulitzer Center talking about the effective criminalization of homosexuality on the LGBT, the effective criminalizing homosexuality on the prevalence of HIV. And it's very easy to lapse into, especially when you're within the medical community, to lapse into saying, oh, MSM instead of gay men and who have sex with men. And you very quickly become hard to understand and unreachable and just inaccessible in your writing, in your discussion. And it's really important. It's our responsibility, essentially, to act as mentors. Medical professionals have a very specific way of speaking, and that's important what they do. They need to use that precise language. But it's not always something that your average reader can or will relate to or even understand. So we have a duty to understand all of the technical subtleties and then put it into slightly more understandable. And then in that same vein, medical professionals also have very specific language they'll use when they are talking to their subjects. That's their responsibility to use the most medically accurate, most scientifically accurate language possible. But for us, it's not about the medical side, it's not about the technical side, it's about saying to our subject, how would you like your person? Exactly what Allison was saying this morning. It's not, are you a person suffering from HIV? No, you're a person living with HIV. What is, ask people what they want, how they want to be seen, how they want to be documented. And then don't assume the one person says works for any other person in the demographic you're looking at. I'm about to go to Canada to work on a story on HIV in this community. And I talked to someone who very specifically said, look, some people think that there's sort of a common set of terms where you say rejecting drug user is sort of acceptable for, but he said, no, with every single term you use, it's not sex worker, it's not injecting drug user, it's a person who is injecting drug user, it's a person who is a sex worker. Before anything else, he wanted people to be recognized as people first, and then whatever their stigmatized label was. And that's really important, understanding those subtleties, picking up on them, and then making sure you stick to them and respect people's self-identification. And then just in terms of identity in general, how do you represent, how do you think, especially for being journalists, how do you represent people who have been stigmatized, who are at risk just by being seen with you as journalists, who in your continued coverage of them in the media, how do you represent someone's story? Because frequently, look, the best way to tell an issue story is by putting a human face to that. There's no better way. But if you're going to put that person in danger, it's your responsibility. Maybe 10 years ago, it was easy as an international journalist to go into a story abroad, document them, bring it back to Western media, publish that story, and then their families, their friends, their community would never hear about it. And maybe that was okay. Now, sorry, I should somewhat referencing these are photos from the work we've done on the LGBT community with the Pulitzer Center. Now, everyone can follow his smartphone. Everyone's just walking around on Facebook, on Twitter. Maybe when I started this project 5 years ago and something in CNN, I would know that only people who consume Western media in English-speaking countries were seeing it. Now they see everything. Like the second storyline goes up, there will undoubtedly be some homophobic comment from Uganda. So I have to be very cognizant of who my audience is and who's going to see these photos. And if someone says that they're scared, that they're worried about their influence, you have to cognizant of that. More responsibilities don't stop when you leave the country, when you stop reporting. They continue. You have to, whatever work you've done to establish trust with an individual, with a community, with an activist body, you have a responsibility to continue to earn trust. You can't just leave. And then just in terms of things, it's really good. All of this work is on my post. But I just so getting into the series and talking about comfort level, and first of all, as a photographer in particular, sometimes, but as a reporter as well, the best thing you can do sometimes in an interview is to just set everything down and talk and listen. And it's hard. It's, as an instinct, we are very much trained to document everything we see, and we're working on a story, we're excited to document everything we see. But people who are not, we live in a really saturated world. You know, I'm sure everyone has in some capacity seen a journalist or a man on the street interview in DC, in New York, and whatever. We know that's just how everything works, you know. But when you're working in slightly less media parts of the world, people get really nervous and really sensitive, and they've got a big digital camera that has a loud shutter. It's not a comfortable feeling. I mean, I hate being photographed. I don't know if you guys feel but that's really uncomfortable. You are asking a lot from people when you show up and you say, I want you to tell me your deepest secrets, your most personal stories. I want to photograph you at your most vulnerable, and then I'm going to tell everyone else that. You're really asking a lot. So making sure that people are comfortable with who you are and what you want to do and understand that you care about them as a person first and as a story second is so valuable. I'm just going to quickly talk about the series in terms of the questions. So I've been working with this core group of activists in Uganda for 4 years now. And this selection of people, they're all very visible. They're all in both international and Ugandan media. They can be seen. But still, there's, ideally when you're doing a portrait series, you really want to be able to put people in context. You want to be able to make something environmental that shows what's going on in their lives. But it's not always in Uganda in this context. You can't always do that. Just be actively going out. I stand out pretty quickly in Uganda. Going out on the street with someone and taking a photo automatically makes them a target. Automatically makes people around them think, why are they being singled out? Journalists right now, especially Western journalists in Uganda, are almost all somehow reporting on LGBT issues. So it's really a trigger. So you have to think about it as you tell the story. And this is just a portrait series I did with my iPhone. There are double exposures, and in some small way, I'm just going to convey that really, no matter how public you are, no matter in the public eye, these activists sorry, they still have to keep trying themselves very careful, so just things to think about. And maybe you can open up some questions.
Obviously, from seeing, you're all visual reporters. You create these artifacts that live on. And, you all touched on this, but I think it might be interesting for people starting out. Have you had an experience where someone who gave you consent to have their photo shared, or someone who wanted their story told in some way, came back to you afterwards with a story or an issue of stress that was created? And without, how do you, I think this is something that probably most of experience, but how did you deal with that situation? What is the resolution of that situation?
Yeah, well, so the problem in Uganda is that the legal status has been shifting, especially this year. In December of 2015, Parliament passed the Anti-Homosexuality Act. In February of this year, President Museveni signed it into law. And in August of this year, the Constitutional Court struck it down. So there have been sort of different degrees of criminalization in place over the course of the year. And so with activists, they are all sort of basically that's fine. But for individuals, and there are a lot of just average people who are struggling they want to be public with their sexual identity, but when one day they're criminal, one day they're not, it's very hard. And I did have the first few photos in the slideshow were taken in 2011 were of gay couples. And that was something that hadn't been documented, and maybe the best, most effective way to show what people were going through. I had one couple who came to me, and I didn't publish them for 2 years because I did worry that I was going to put people in danger, but they were published in CNN earlier this year, and one couple came to me and said, we thought it was okay, we thought it would be all right, but my partner just got kicked out of his home in the slums, his parents found out, and he can't go home, he can't talk to his family. And yeah, I mean, it is maybe the worst I've felt in my life. And there's, at that point, I can't unpublish it. I can't do anything about it. It's been seen, it's out there. But it really makes you think about, especially in a situation like this where status can change, and also it's your responsibility to make sure that your subjects understand the long-term consequences of putting a photo on the internet. Because once it's out there, you cannot take it back. You can never take it back, no matter, you know, ask CNN to take it down, put the damages down. So you have to be very cognizant of what exactly the risks are. And there was no resolution to that. I expressed to him how incredibly sorry I was, and I put him in contact with a group that they've been essentially organizing small shelters in some of the slum areas of Kampala. And the last time I talked to him, he and his partner are still together and still in conflict. So but yeah, I mean that if you can avoid ever being in that situation, that is the worst feeling.
So yeah, and what I will say on this is slightly different, and that is, I've been in the weird position of like having to defend the my subjects from editors who wanted to put their names out there. You know, it's actually happened in the New York Times a couple of years ago, and we did a and they were like, well, why can't we publish the names? Why can't we do this? And I'm like, well, because the minors, they're like, you know, there's some very sensitive things on it. And I had to fight with like some very big name editors who should know better, but didn't. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because you got to be pretty strong and solid about what you know what your subject matter is, what you're doing too, and like that should be a condition that you set right away with the editors that you're working with. The little clip I showed you here, the piece that we did for NPR. NPR is very concerned about this woman's this story getting back to the community, because her family doesn't know, and the family of the girl who died doesn't know that she died of abortion. And so when the girl gave me this interview, she's like, you know, you have to make sure that, and as Danielle was saying, like, it's really difficult in an era when everything's going on, right? And so we chose a name for her and for her friends, and NPR said, no, that's not enough. So in the final piece, we're just going to initials. But we've been going back and forth with like the ethics team there about like how much is too much, like should we be obscuring the faces, should we, you know, what should we do? We've already done something video, you know, we've blurred out the name of the hotel, we've like, there's absolutely no reference at all to the town that they're in, or the neighborhood that they're in, neighborhoods, but they're still scared and nervous, and it's still to this day, I mean, it's kind of we're still to protect this girl's identity. So these are very real concerns, and these are things that you guys are definitely dealing with. Okay, so I've had a few experiences with this, just working at a daily newspaper. When I was in graduate school, I worked for the daily Egyptian newspaper at SIU, and I did a really short story about the women shelters closing in town. And one of the young mothers staying there let me hang out with her and tell her story. You know, she understood it was for a newspaper, there'd be a video, people on the internet would see it. I did the story, she called and said thank you. And then I ran into her at the mall about a year later, and she told me as a result of that story, she had lost her job because her employer thought it was putting a bad face on the salon she worked at to have a quote-unquote battered woman. And like you said, you know, I felt horrible, and there's nothing I could say to make it better. A year later, I saw her again. Actually, she couldn't hear. And she had started her own business. And so it had a happy ending. But for a while there, it was a huge learning experience for me. But even though we had consent and what she understood and I understood, there was a consequence that neither of us could have anticipated. And then just on a more daily basis, I was doing a series about autism, and I had started to work with a family that had two severely autistic children.
and had a few dinners with them, spent time in their house, and then they decided that they didn't want the whole community to know what they were dealing with. And in that situation, that was their decision to make. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasted your time." I mean, I waste my time all the time. So,
Yeah, I guess this question is for maybe mostly Allison. About releases. When I was in the field, well, I feel like when you sit down and go through all the steps that you talk about, explaining who you are, why you're doing it, I'm always concerned that asking people to sign releases can make them uncomfortable. It's like a binding agreement. So why do you always sign releases?
Yeah, good question. My thoughts now are that it's a good step because some people said no, but at least they know what they're getting into. And I feel like we do it in a way that is as effective as possible. So that it's not like, here's this scary legal document, you must sign it. It's like you're signing it. And it's just, before they even see a piece of paper, it's a good discussion, you know? And then it's like, okay, so we've written this down. So it's, you know, it's not like you're. Sure. And I certainly do it for subjects who I'm putting on video because it seems like that's the situation. Like I've had that really fast. Like we need this. So I find like that's a really important thing. I do it with any main characters that I find. I don't do it with every person. But anybody on the basis of spending a significant amount of time, I feel like it's an important step because you don't want this to go halfway through. You don't want halfway through them to be like, oh yeah, I didn't get it. And now I do. I think
My question is kind of related to how you present yourself in a way to make them comfortable, based on what you're wearing. Do you try to dress like the community that you're in? Do you dress professionally? What do you do that makes them feel most comfortable to talk to you?
I think it depends on who you are. Yeah, I'm always aware of that, especially dealing with and that does matter. Yeah, when I was traveling, when I was working on media, you know, the whole like parka and the fun like hair thing and the scarf thing, you know, maybe I'm kind of walk here, but like just something like everybody knows you're not from there. So like I was wearing everything wrong, you know, people would make fun of me all the time. But at least they saw that I was trying and that it was let's get it.
yeah, I would say be sensitive, but not patronizing. Like, when I was going to Nepal, I read this guide that, oh, if you're blonde, you could dye your hair brown. I don't think that's going to make it. So you just accept that you're an outsider, and you're, sometimes maybe if you're in a Muslim country, cover your hair, or, you know, whatever it is, but you don't have to go anything so far as to try to dress in the traditional clothes that you're forthcoming. And as photographers, you know, comfortably, that's my mantra. Good shoes.
Yeah, definitely separate. Yeah. I'm almost always in jeans or t-shirt. And I think just dressing in very average basic clothes, like everyone knows. So, you know, I always, as a photographer, I always travel with a scarf in my bag. And I found myself, my last trip to Uganda, I just ended up doing a project on religion and had to go to a bunch of mosques and that I don't think they would talk to me if I hadn't shown up with my direct. I was also, I was was working on a project with me for the Wall Street Journal over the summer in the Orthodox Jewish community, and that like just going going up with a long skirt and long sleeves and covering my head. The head wrap I would not have talked about if I so it does being sensitive in the right way. It's definitely maybe better success in many cases.
You had any advice for me? You have any issues?
Yes, yes.
But I mean, there are certain subjects you deal with sensitive internal and issues. And there are other things that mentioned in that approaching you.
Really good question. How's the weekend going?
Man, so I say, I will say one thing, and that is like when I do the stories, and like for example, India, as we were talking about, like we were in a very remote village where like nobody had ever really seen people like us. You know, like, so that was a very specific situation. And I spent a lot of weeks trying to clean up because I knew there was not. I mean, just even getting access to some of these women, weeks of being there with visiting the village with no gear, weeks of just going and cleaning up. And I absolutely knew that we would not be so, and it was really hard to find a woman who had permission from her husband and the husband to hang out with us and walk around. So that was tricky for me, but definitely. That's right. I have a question that's more about public health and science reporting, just in general on how to consider stories. My interest in reporting is public health, and one big thing in that arena is like prevention of chronic illness. And so I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or strategies of how to make stories about, lives that were not lost or illnesses that go on for a long time and there's sort of nothing new. How to make those interesting and hooking audiences, or how to approach that?
I think that's incredibly important to do something that is easy to neglect because it's not the sexy headline. It's not Ebola. It's hard to take those not sexy stories. But first of all, just people to find it. I know this isn't what you asked me. I just want to say it anyway because I was thinking of it. Zach and I were just at Johns Hopkins talking to a bunch of epidemiologists and on the panel, and medical professionals are so excited to tell people about their stories because they do incredible work and they do really interesting work, and frequently there is a barrier in relatability between the way they get their information out and the way we get our information out. So if you know any public health professionals, ask them one of the stories that you should be telling because they will love to tell you what they're working on. But specifically in terms of that, I mean, and again, I said this earlier, but I think frequently it's, you have to find a person. You have to find a face to any issue. And look, even if it's not a sexy topic, you can find something heartbreaking, something beautiful that will really touch people, that will make you realize why it is just as important as the scary, internal commercial illnesses that we're as well.
I would just add that I have a colleague that is working on Alzheimer's drug, and it's a long-term thing, but he has checked in with this couple that has been suffering from the disease, and his wife is taking care of him. So a lot of it is just we're voicing it to take care of someone that you love in that situation. I think it's every 6 months to a year, he goes to their house and does an interview, and over the last 5 years that he's compiled, there's a really compelling body of work that it wouldn't work as a one-off. It's the time element that makes it so compelling. I don't have a lot else to add, except that these can be very hard to sell stories. I've definitely discovered that maternal health is not a hot seller, but it is possible, So I find finding a set of sympathetic editors is should be or shouldn't be, but is a very large capability, and people don't always understand that back end. but like finding those people that get it, that are willing to be our, advocates, that's really important. And also like, I think what I find is like, if you do this long-term reporting and continue to, develop a beautiful personal story over time about what this topic, eventually there's gonna be a news. I find this, and it's always like the most unlikely time, right? But like there'll be something that brings it back around, like there's a news story, there'll be something, and so that's hard to sort of it's hard to sort of have faith in when you're doing it because you're like, wow, I don't get it, but like it will come back around. And so if you believe in the story, and it's a good one. It's and you've got the ears of the right people, there'll be a place for it. I just.
Hello. I reported on the Roma during the summer, and they are notoriously very private, and I had a short amount of time to report. You guys spoke a lot about the personal things on the issue, but I found that very difficult in the short amount of time that I was there. So, do you guys have any tips on putting the personal touch on the story when you don't have a lot of time to be in the trash with your subject?
I was only in those refugee camps for a week, but what made how I got the access was developing the relationships with their families in the United States. And if I hadn't done that, there is no way that they would have talked to me whatsoever. And so I literally went to the camp with like someone's name and their HUD number. And we had a great fixer. And just they would lead us to these huts, and they were expecting us because their relatives in America said, "Oh, these ladies from America, and we had gifts from their family, and so it was a really neat experience. But I don't know if in your situation that's helpful information.
I would just say, kind of repeating what Melissa said this morning, is that, sometimes you work and the communities that have been repeatedly slandered and just given a lot of bad press, it's understandable why they're talking, but you just have to keep knocking on doors. And you'll find that one person eventually who will just decide, well, it's not judgment call, that you seem trustworthy, they like you, they like how you're presenting yourself, and they'll be willing to help you. All it takes is one person, and then their friends will say, all right, fine, maybe you talk to that, maybe they'll talk to you. So you just do stuff.
I also find that like pictures are a very good way, right? Because like it's again stressing how important it is to write fixer or set a fixer. Like in Nigeria, I have like 3 different people. One in each little community. Because I walked into one of those communities one day, like one of the very first days, and the guy was like, "You need to go meet the chief." And he was wearing a bottle of schnapps. It couldn't be anything else. It had to be schnapps. So we got the schnapps, and we met the chief, and he's like, "Yeah, you've been here 2 days. You've been on this street, and this street, and I've been watching you, and we've been protecting you because we knew you were coming here with schnapps." So, and that opened my eyes. I was like, "Wow, there's a system here that I didn't know about." But that, so I'm getting off topic a little bit, but that little thing with the fixer, it made me realize, like, I was not doing that if I just thought it brought somebody from the community. And that guy not only introduced me to the chief, but he also introduced me to a lot of other people. He was a very respected, the kids, he knew everybody, and we got a lot of stories just based on his relationship. Because he goes, no, they're cool. I mean, we were walking down the railroad tracks in that village, in that little area, like one evening, getting dark, and 2 like big dudes I was shooting something like a little bit away. And I'm like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, you know, I'm with him. And they're like, oh, okay, see you later, you know. So I don't know, just going in with relationships, just as Julia said, families, Pulitzer, it can be with your own NGO, right? But because NGOs, a lot of those little, you know, a lot of the grassroots ones, a lot of them that they're people on the ground. Do something. So,
Then just really quickly ask a question that I think is interesting. How do you guys have pictures?
Yeah.
Because I have a really weird way of doing it. How do you do it? I mean, because most of my work this year in particular has been in Africa. And the only way you get around in Kampala is on a photo. It's a motorcycle taxi, essentially. And those guys know the city better than anyone else. Like, I know there are people who, a lot of fixers also tend to be journalists globally. So not only do they understand the culture and the issues, but they understand what it means to be journalists. And they understand how to ask the right questions that you don't yet know yourself. But in Uganda in particular, a good photo driver will know. And so I will frequently just bounce around and do that guy and find someone who clearly knows exactly what they're looking for. And they're frequently so valuable. And then you've got your driver, you've got your fixer, you've got everything. So I love that.
I've only done international reporting very few times. In the fall, at the Post Gazette where I work, we have a program called Funding Fellows. And so international journalists come and work in our newsroom. And we had an awesome guy come in from Nepal, and his name was Deepak Gadagiri. And we went to Kathmandu and met him, and he's like, this guy will take you to the refugee camps. And he was awesome. And he got us everywhere. And he's also a journalist, so very passionate about what storytelling is about, which I think helped that he had that journalistic instinct.
Yeah, echoing that. Like I very often find my pictures through other journalists. So as I'm here on the Book Club, but if you want to join, let me know and I'll invite you. But it's a great group that it's just all international journalists. And so anytime I'm like, if I don't know a journalist who's been somewhere, and Pulitzer Center can help you with it, by the way, connect to other journalists who've been other places. So really good resource. But I just post something on multi-club, and almost all the time somebody knows somebody who's reported for more recently, or you know, and they can connect me with their fixer, or say like, you know, or that fixer can then connect me with exactly the person I'm looking for in town. So I think other journalists are always my first stop. Sometimes though you end up in places where like what have you been and like what have you done. So my second line is NGOs, and it's a little trickier I find because if you mentioned this, like you don't want to be telling the NGO line. So if you find somebody who's like working for the NGO or contracted for that NGO, they may be their sort of filter may be the NGO filter. That particular sort of message. So that's tricky, but they can connect you with other people. And you know, just always remember it's a network, right? So you may talk to your goal is to find somebody on the ground who knows what they're doing. And that may just be talking to the first person, the second person, and then if you're looking for a woman, you know, you might have to go to 5 or 6 different people you talk to actually find the right person. But the key is just connecting them. So journalism is really
So all of this seems pretty good. I mean, we're talking about disease and crime and victimization. I'm just curious about how you, as journalists, deal with that. Sort of being empathizing with these people. Or does it affect you?
I mean, I think that question is fine. I never really know the answer because I'm not living their lives, you know, like I know that I can deny it. It's not my life. And So I think that doesn't, you know, it's something it's kind of like, so that, I guess that's the best answer I can really give. Also, I mean, this is something I've been doing a lot, and that is, I'm kind of moving in my own reporting towards stories that are more convey, like less like this life is terrible and these are the terrible things, but also like showing that like there's so many, you know, aspects of life. And I've been doing a lot of contributing to the everyday academic Instagram. So I've been contributing to that, and their philosophy is so great. It's like, look, guys, you know, life can be really happy in these places that seem really hard, and that all of them are things. So you kind of swing that from back. So the point is only like, you know, it's not like you're 24/7 feeling that you're totally doing yourself. You know, you're in an environment. But there's a lot of other things.
Totally agree with her about, you know, their life, their living. With the refugee project, I did a series of portraits that just tried to make it like every portrait, you know, not that sad, refugee, dirty, in the gutter. You know, I wanted it to be like any family. Go to J. Skinny, get a nice picture, you know. And my editor, when I got back, said, "Oh, they're smiling." Like, yeah, because there's things that are happy there too. They're not just sad that they don't have lights all day long. You know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I work on such a wide. I'm thankful that I work on a wide range of stories, so that it's not all, you know, because I think I'm doing this 24/7. I'm so depressed all the time. And yeah, I mean, compartmentalizing is really absolutely important for your own sanity when you're working on these stories for a long period of time. I will say that I'm normally very good at distancing myself emotionally, just being in work mode, but when I heard that the Constitutional Court stuff, I was like following the Constitutional Court decision, and I was in the middle of the beach in France, and I just started falling on the beach. I lost it. I like all these different things. But yeah, it's hard, and I think part of it is that you do so many different things that you have to have a balance. Better and more photojournalists. I know a lot of them who are deeply troubled people.
That is an excellent place to end this conversation. Move on. But this is really great and some good tips about some really good future thoughts. So please.
So before we move on to lunch logistics, I just wanted to thank all three of you, and also to say something in answer to Rosie's question on the importance of balance and how you deal with the subjects you deal with. I want to say that the three of you, with the three who spoke before, are dealing with, you know, very difficult subjects, but you're also making people aware of that. And I think by your jobs, you're doing something good, and so you're not overwhelmed by, you know, very dark what you're seeing, because other people don't know about it. It's not going to change. Now, moving on to lunch. It is 12 o'clock, and we do have